So now switching to our featured presentation from John Pryor, who leads our management consulting practice. And last week, John talked about the definition of value proposition. It was a very interesting presentation.
Absolutely. And now let's continue where we left off last week and go through how to create a value proposition.
Okay, but before we do that, I just want to remind everybody to post your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them.
Yes.
The value proposition there in
and
that
I'll
bottom
start by
left is
asking
this
a
idea that
What is
it
value
describes the
proposition?
benefits customers can expect from your products and services. Again, not about why your products and services are better than your competitors, and not about why your products and services are great for everyone, but it's about what people should expect from your products and services. So that starts with a set of benefits that you design, that you have. Then you look in out in the real world and see how are those characteristics interacting with the customer community. Now, this is an iterative process. It depends on where you start. So at the very far left, you might be a new startup, no customers, no product, but an idea, and you're creating a value proposition around that idea, and then building out products and services around it, and then engaging with the customer community to find the right customers for that. For most of us, though, we sit in existing companies, and so it's really about recognizing and refining our value proposition and making sure that we're constantly targeting the right customers that resonate with our value proposition, or if we believe that we need different customers than the customers we have, appropriately and thoughtfully adjusting our value proposition to understand where we might be headed.
So in this next segment, we explore how strategy and value proposition work together.
Exciting.
This here is the strategy cascade. And so every consulting firm has their own way of thinking about strategy and applying that. This happens to be the one that SMA uses. I'm obviously quite fond of it. But the idea is that you start with goals and aspirations. Who and what do you want to be? Then you go to where to play. What are your customers? Where are you actually going to compete? How to win is about how you will win. What's your right to win? This is about our competitors. And then assets and capabilities, and then management systems is really about how you would go about it. It's an iterative process as it's been described. And goals and aspirations can mean a lot of things, although value proposition fits in there, but can mean a lot of things. And so the reason we put goals and aspirations at the beginning is we find that a number of customers, they'll simply say, well, we want more revenue and more margin. And sure, of course, like that makes sense, but do you want more revenue or do you want more margin? Or are you actually trying to target both? Are you trying to target market share? Are you trying to target market penetration? So goals and aspirations, it's a more sophisticated question than just sort of make more money kind of question. But that tagline at the top is really the kind of the heart of my thesis here, of our thesis. So value proposition is a precursor. It is attached to your company, not a specific pursuit and not a specific customer. It enables you to communicate internally and externally how you're going to organize, how you're going to evaluate different operating models and profit models, and then how you're going to invest and make decisions to drive strategy. So all of that has to pull back to the very beginning. If value proposition is an afterthought, if it is something that shows up, say, in the how to win box, where you're starting to talk about competitors, then you may have already botched the value proposition because you might be targeting the wrong customers. You might find that value proposition that you need to win against certain competitors doesn't actually align with your other goals and aspirations, say some sort of market penetration question or some sort of question around innovation or something like that. So value proposition really has to go all the way to the beginning. And indeed, that's how we articulate it. What do we want to do? Who do we want to sell it to? and how do we want to sell it? So really, these are the essential questions that are here. This idea that says, I need to understand what my value proposition is. It's interactive with the customer community. Does that make sense with who I want to sell it to? Does it not? And then it's incumbent on what operating model a company might use. So how you would go about your profit model. Once you sort that out and figure out who you want to be when you grow up, and make sure that you have customers that resonates with, then we can get into some questions of, are we the best choice for our customer? And certainly these are absolutely relevant questions. This again gets back to the differentiation question and where you sit with your discriminators, why you're the best choice among others who might have similar value propositions or similar approaches. And then down here this is really about how we will make it happen. So you have to make sure that if you have a value proposition and an operating model, then things need to be aligned to make sure that that it's appropriately engaged.
Now let's find out, how do you define a value proposition?
I'm sure John will tell us.
Lots of reasons why somebody should do business with you. But one sort of simple way to do it, which is just a 2x2, is sort of, if you go along the top part there, cost and benefits, and then on the vertical axis, products, what we sell, and services, how we do it. So it's really kind of like these easy sorts of rubrics, like we're always the lowest price. We always have a superior product. We're always results driven. We're always hassle free. And then that breaks down into this idea of really this value leadership. So in some respects, you can be the best product leader. You can have the best total solution. You can have best total cost. And so an example on best product would be, it's really hard to actually have best product, because if you're truly organized value proposition wise or value leadership wise around best product, you're constantly cannibalizing your own product because you're constantly inventing something that's better. Probably one of the best examples is BMW. So BMW isn't interested. They will, every time they come out with a model, will have some sort of cutting edge technology that makes it relevant to get a new BMW right away. But the clientele that they sell to can afford it. They choose to afford it. There's lots of reasons for it. A best total cost sort of example would be something like Frontier Airlines. Arguably Southwest. That's an interesting question, different conversation, but it's some place where every aspect of the company is oriented around driving down costs. There's no frills. There's cheap seats. Southwest does do this. They have the same type of their innovation strategy is around this. So the same type of aircraft. They only go to mid-market airports. The way they service it, the way they board, all of it is around getting a best total cost. And best total solution or customer intimacy is where a lot of people want to be. And that's about being responsive to a customer's problem. So it's probably one of the best examples are the companies that like Ecolab, where they'll go in and clean restaurants. So that they'll go in and strip down everything, clean all the way to the walls and the floors. And sure, they're going to sell you soap too, and you're going to pay for that soap. But what you're really paying for is peace of mind that you won't get shut down by a health inspector. So I use this not to say that these are the only three ways that you could define it. Michael Tracy pioneered this kind of thinking, and it's just a useful one useful way. There are other ways to define what your value is that you have, but the point of this is that value would align, and the pull through effects, everything would be there. So you can't really do two at once. And lots of companies tell me, yes, I can. We always have. And that's where that threshold competency is. You have to have a good price. You have to be responsive to customers. You have to have a good product. But the question is how far you go along it. So as an example, you can't be best product and best total cost. So like the idea that BMW would be able to invent bleeding edge technology every single time on every single new model, and yet would offer the cheapest possible car out there that would compete with the lowest end cars is not, it doesn't match. And it wouldn't match anyway because the customers that you're serving are different anyways. So some of the pieces that support that on the side here is, again, value proposition starts with you, and more importantly, it's core to who you want to be, not just what your value proposition could be.
Wow, that is just so interesting. Please continue.
So we all know the customer perspective is important. John, can you discuss how customers fit in the development of the value proposition?
Oh, yeah, let's learn.
Well, again, Tracy Company happens to have a unique way of thinking about this. Main parameters of value. There are other approaches for this, but this is the idea of what's the customer's vote on your value proposition. And again, it's a fairly straightforward way of thinking about it. Sort of two dimensions. On the vertical axis is what dimensions of value. So if you start to list out cost, consulting support, engineering support, technical advancement, schedule, whatever those dimensions are that are relevant to your industry and your customers, that's sort of like how important are they gets rated on that vertical axis. Then on the horizontal axis gets rated how they think about you. And this is completely a perception. So it's totally related to what they think about you rather than what you actually do. And so at the far right, you would be in a leadership position. So that you are viewed as the best of the best. Threshold is that blue. That's where you do it well enough that nobody's going to fire you, but you're not the best. And then that trailing is nobody. In general, customers don't think you do those aspects well. Again, it's a brutal, unfair system because it's about perception in this particular case, which may or may not be reality. And so from a practical standpoint, this is how it works. So what you would do, and having done this before, you internally come up with all the sorts of parameters of value that a customer cares about. So we talked about, inventory management, consulting capabilities, newest technology, return management, volume flexibility, implementation time. So any number of things. It's actually, this example happened to be for a logistics supply company. They make guts of warehouses. They also make warehouses too, but high tech, AI, also the racks and all of that. So that you do it on average importance. So you do interviews with customers, ideally your customers, but depending on if you're moving into a new area, you might have to just do open research. But you sort of figure out like what's the average importance, and then you figure out what's the average performance. If you are here in the green, and these are the things that your value proposition matches, which are super important to the customer, and they think you're really good at it, you're set. Your value proposition and the associated value parameters align with what your customers want. Conversely, though, if you're down here and the things that you think that you are really good at, or the things that you think are relevant to your value proposition, but they're not, either they're not important to the customer, or more importantly, they don't think you do very well, you've got a problem. Now, we just did this internally for a new space company. And it ended up, they had things that, what came out of that was in different customer segments. The customer segments that they thought were their most important ones that they should be targeting ended up didn't value the things that our client happened to be really good at. And it ended up that a couple of segments that they weren't actively targeting really valued the things that they were good at and viewed them as good at that. And so it's led to all these really interesting conversations about go-to-market strategy and which customers they should be targeting, customer segments they should be targeting, and why they should be thinking about those customer segments differently.
Oh my gosh, I am just learning so much from this presentation.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great topic and a lot of detail here. So, John, can you tell us how to put all this together?
Yeah.
Ultimately, you got to identify a value proposition and the associated operating models or profit models that best fit your products and your services. You need to identify the customers that are going to place high value on your products and service or your operating model, and who are willing to purchase that over competitors or buy it at a premium. And it doesn't really matter which way you start. It's an iterative process. So defining goals and aspirations, who are we? Our economy, our brand, competencies, a lot of different variables go in that. Who do we want to be? What's our intent? What's our vision? And then context for future competitions. So who are the new players, new market dynamics? What will the future of business look like? Identifying customers or your perceived customers, a couple of different ways you can do it, lots of ways. One is market segmentation. That's where you identify different segments, and then you can identify whether those variables that fit in those characteristics match with your parameters of value that align with your value proposition. Another way to do it is market mapping, which is more about identifying revenue and profit pools, as well as competitive intensity. So these really dark green ones were bigger markets. The little yellow squares were lower margin markets. And then there's some questions around competitive intensity. What's your market share? What's the other market share? So that's lots of ways to do it. And then customer value is the next piece that connects to it. And then again, it's all iterative, because you got to go back and forth. You have an idea of what you want to do or what you are doing. You're testing against your customers and identifying those customers. You're identifying what new customers you want to do, and then you're trying to do a value analysis. The techniques that I've shown here are just an approach. Lots of different ways to do it. Lots of different companies think about this in lots of different ways. But this is sort of at the heart of it.
Can I just say, I love market mapping.
So some of you have probably heard us talk about reverse engineering. It's just a way to think about
And
how
one
you
component adds to the
build this.
next
And so the
component,
idea is
and on
that
and
you
on.
start with your
And so let's move on to the conclusion. And John, wrap this up for us.
Mhm.
value proposition, then kind of work your way back. What has to be true for that value proposition to work? The slide I would leave you on is this, which is you again, it's looking at you. What's your ability to deliver against the value proposition you've put for yourself, and then what's your customer's interest in the value that you're creating? And that's should be a virtuous cycle. And I know I spent this entire time telling you guys it's not about your competitors, but yes, ultimately, it eventually is about your competitors, because once you've identified your value proposition and it aligns with the customers that you want to serve, and that makes sense, then you have to deal with your competitive position, because there may be competitors that also are serving those customers either with a similar or same value proposition or a different value proposition, but they've found an operating model that, say, resonates, with those customers. And so you actually need to look at it again from a competitor standpoint to say, well, okay, well, now that my value proposition is aligned with my customers, how do I make sure that I win in that context?
Thank you, John. Is this presentation up on our learning management system, Jacques?
So, we're continuing to develop our process for how to help clients develop value propositions. And soon we'll have the value proposition presentation available on the LMS.
Great, and I will notify everybody when it's available. Why don't we write a book about this topic?
That's a great idea.